Welcome to Garden Views. Interesting conversations with interesting people who have done and/or are doing interesting things. So sit back and enjoy.
Welcome everyone into Garden Views this week, and we're continuing our extrapolation into space, but we are getting back to Earth this week. Not that we haven't been doing that a little bit. We're going to talk about Antarctica, because Antarctica is probably the closest terra firma. I promised myself I would use that phrase at least once during the show. The closest terra firma that represents sort of internationally shared land on this side of the atmosphere. And to help us with that is Ben Barlow, who's actually an attorney in the firm where I work. Ben Barlow is with Dunlop, Bennett, and Ludwig. Actually, he and I started around the same time.
I think we started on the same day.
That's right. It's correct. I wasn't sure about that, but he started as a full-fledged associate. I was just off counsel, so I think technically he's my boss. But today I'm the boss. Ha ha ha. So, Ben, tell folks a little bit about yourself, your background, education, whatever you do professionally, and then we'll do a little lead-in.
Yeah, it's great to be here. I enjoy the podcast, and sort of didn't know that I would have any value added to an episode ever, so I hope that ends up being the case. But yeah, we started, I believe, the same day at the firm. You say the bit about of counsel. I'm actually not sure which is higher than the other right now, and especially at our firm. So we'll just have to let the folks with the higher pay grade sort all that out. But I'm a litigator at the firm, do trademark and IP law, do government debarments, do sort of anything that the bosses tell me to do, and try to keep my smile on my face while I'm doing it. Background for me: I grew up over in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. Went to Bridgewater College for my undergrad, University of Richmond Law School, found my way to Maryland, somewhere where I'm actually live in Woodbine now, and spend a lot of time around Ellicott City and Baltimore, and also dabble in cannabis law. So we sort of cover all the bases.
That's right. We may have a future show on cannabis law as well, as we were talking. At some point, I'm going to have to be done with this space thing, or at least as a weekly feature. I mean, at some point, I think I'm already ahead of where some things are, but at some point, I'm going to be at least where a lot of the stuff is. That point may already have occurred, to be frank. Anyway, so that's great, but you said something about government disbarment. I assure you that almost nobody in the audience knows what government disbarment is. I don't think it has anything to do with what we're going to talk about today, but what is that?
Yeah, where we work, you're up in Maryland. I'm in Maryland too, but I go into our Leesburg and Tyson's offices a good bit. But this area is just rife with government contractors. You couldn't swing a cat, I guess is the euphemism, and not hit a government contractor somewhere.
It is true.
In this area. But when a government contractor or somebody that works for a contracting group, let's say, runs afoul of regulations or the law, think that overbills time, doesn't keep track of their breaks, or they do something as big as commit fraud on a shipment that fulfills a government contract, well, if there's enough reason where the government's worried about your future ability to be responsible, they call it responsibility. If they have a question about that, they might propose that you be debarred. And what that means under the FAR, the Federal Acquisition Regulations, or the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulations, the DFAR, is that they will propose that for a period of up to 3 years, you be prevented from doing any contracting or working for a contractor. So up here where people, that is their career, that is their livelihood, that's a big deal when the government sends you a letter saying we're proposing that you can't do this for 3 years. And so they contact people like me who figure out how to respond to the government and try to make the case that either the person should not be debarred or it should be a minimal period of time. Thankfully, past performance is not indicative of future gains, but the firm has a pretty good track record in helping people with that are facing debarment or contracting issues.
Yeah, we have like an internal cheerleading squad, meaning our marketing department, and they send little success notes around. Victory notice, and then Ben frequently appears on that victory notice about a wide variety of cases. So if you got something in mind, he might be a good one to call. If you've got a Maryland, D.C., Virginia situation, litigation, IP, and as he talked about debarment, sounds a little bit like disbarment, though. Those are usually permanent, but not necessarily. Sometimes you're eligible, but I figured out in your dissertation or your description why they don't call it defarment, because it's the defars, so you can't. It would make more sense, but I guess
pretty good.
Probably only lawyers will get confused by disbarment anyway.
Well, exactly. The Virginia lawyer always had a section in it that listed the people who had gotten in ethical trouble and were either suspended or their licenses, or they were proposed for disbarment. And for years, when I would get the Virginia lawyer, I would just go straight to that page and look for anyone I had gone to school with. So haven't seen anybody, and so that's I guess that's good, but it takes a little bit of the enjoyment out of reading the Virginia lawyer for me.
Well, true story. I used to be sort of regulatory compliance for my prior firm's one of their major clients, and I had to look at the Maryland disciplinary report and the DC disciplinary report, which was in the DC Bar Journal at the time, might still be, every month. The Maryland one, I think I had to look it up, and I had to tell the client what lawyers had any sort of disciplinary trouble, because all of them were ineligible to work for our firm or get any referral work from us or any other firm or lawyer in their network, period. And I did know the occasional lawyer in there. Some of them had been people that I had fired at times. Anyway, this is not what anyone is tuned into. Just to know that I was once a big shot, or some reasonable facsimile of same. So anyway, so back to Antarctica. So Antarctica is what some people call the South Pole. It is where the penguins are, not the polar bears. It is a continent. It's a landmass covered with something like 2 miles of ice, which, another story is if there's still like 2 miles of ice vertically on top of that or not. And it is international. There's, as far as we know, no one lives there. No humans, no one, nothing sentient. There are legends abound, and there's myths, and there's whole things about the continents being in different places and portals to the Hollow Earth, and spaceships and Nazi expeditions and things like that. And believe me, before Garden of Doom is done, we're going to cover all of that stuff if we have not already. Spoiler, the portal to Hollow Earth? Oh, yes, we have. So check out Garden of Doom if you're interested in that. But today we're just going to go with what is not boring at all, but the more terrestrial stuff. So Ben was kind enough to volunteer to take on this task. Actually, funny story is that one day he contacted me. He goes, "I didn't know you did a podcast." I go, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "Yeah, it was on my suggestion feed. I listened to it. It was really good." And I'm like, "Is that Jeff Lippman from our firm? Is that the guy I know?" And I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "It's good." And apparently he told a few other people to listen to the firm, and so there's some fans. That you're not the first member of the firm to be on the podcast, by the way. Yeah, Dominique was on the Here There Be Dragons episode.
What?
Yeah. So, it's exciting. But you are the first one, I think, to be on Garden Views. So welcome and thank you for breaking that cherry. All right. Tell us a little bit about Antarctica besides what I've said.
Well, I guess I think that in that email back and forth, I remember later getting an email from you that talked about some of the things that were coming up on the podcast and whether we knew any guests. And you listed something. You listed Antarctica law on a long list of things that you were interested in. And well, I'm not an expert in Antarctica law, but I'm probably the only person at the firm that's been to Antarctica. I've gone swimming in Antarctica. I've camped in Antarctica, and so I thought, well, this sounds pretty cool. So I was glad for this chance, and it gave me a chance to go back just beyond like reading about Shackleton and the Endurance and books like that. It gave me a chance to brush up and come up to speed on more of Antarctica law. And I think before we even get into the international flavor of Antarctica, it's important to take a step back and just remember what Antarctica is. Like you said, it's the South Pole, it's penguins, it's the last discovered continent. Unlike the other continents, though, what's cool about Antarctica is it only has a human history of about 200 years. So 200 years of human history. You have over 60,000. I think it's over 61,000, maybe 62 at this point. Nonfiction books and papers that have been written about Antarctica. Over 91% of those have been written since 1951.
Wow.
So this is a relatively new area. Area technically as an area of the world, but when we're talking about Antarctica law, Antarctica science, we're really talking about something that's not that old. It's younger than the United States. Right now, when you talk about what Antarctica is, it's a continent with 70 permanent research stations from 29 different countries. We'll get into that a little bit later. You have the U.S. and its bases. It has the largest base, which is McMurdo Research Station down in Antarctica. The U.S. also has the southernmost research station in Antarctica. That's the Edmonds and Scott Research Base. So Antarctica is sort of a fascinating place. If you were to look at sea charts, definitely before 1700, most of them between 1700 and 1760, you wouldn't see anything that said Antarctica on that. You would see something that said Terra Australis Incognita, that southern land, unknown southern land.
If anything at all.
Yeah, and so you'll see a lot of the old charts, like a 1657 chart is Jansonius. He has a chart you'll look at, and you'll just see the outline. It looks like, the barrier islands of North Carolina, where you just see sort of the line and little angles. That's all Antarctica is, because it was sort of like I guess in that period of time, it was less about figuring out what Antarctica is as opposed to figuring out what Antarctica isn't. Because legend was that there was a giant southern land continent below 60 degrees. And so most of the time, people were trying to find this giant land continent. And when they couldn't spot it, they couldn't figure out what was going on. 1772, while things were sort of going crazy in this country, Captain Cook has the first of his southern voyages. And he doesn't find Antarctica. In fact, he never sees anything. But what he doesn't do is that he's able to say that he doesn't see this landmass. So he's able to put the terra incognita to bed, and people start realizing, hey, there's something else going on. That takes you up to about 1820, 1821. 1820, this is January 30th, 1820, Edward Bransfield, a Brit, he sees the Trinity Peninsula in Antarctica. He sees it from an island. I've actually been to that island. He sees it, and that's believed to be the first sighting of Antarctica. Except people now have figured out that 3 days before he saw it, either the January 27th or January 28th, there were 2 Russian ships down there, and some of their crowd went on shore, and that's supposedly the first sighting of Antarctica. 1821, jumping ahead, stories say that killing seals is the primary activity in the South Georges Island, Falkland Islands, down around Antarctica in 1821. People are saying now that a lot of sealers went on shore, and they were the first people to land. That's when there's a British-American, Captain John Davis. He goes on shore at Antarctica, but none of that's documented. We don't have documentation that anybody actually stood on Antarctica. but we assume, based on these stories about 1821 and all of the sealing activity there, that's when the first people to step foot on Antarctica took a step. 1831, James Clark Ross locates the North Pole. The Ross will come up later because we have the Ross ice shelf down there that seems to be melting and breaking every time you watch the news.
Right.
But James Clark Ross, he locates the North Pole. 1839, he's looking for the South Pole. He determines that it can't be found from the sea. Takes you up a little bit further. 1893, a great year in history because that's the year, of course, of the Chicago Exposition, the World's Fair in Chicago, The Devil in the White City, the Eric Larson book. That's also the year that it's the start of the heroic age involving Antarctica. That's 1893 to 1918, where there's many expeditions around Antarctica. Modern whaling starts.
So like Ulysses and Achilles and Hercules, or different heroes?
Well, different heroes. A lot of heroes ended up getting caught in the ice. You get a lot of people like stuck in the ice, and that, I guess that's heroic, but it also could be not following your ways, I guess. But 1893, you have that leading up, and Devil in White City. If any of your listeners haven't read it, I'm sure they all have. The Chicago Exposition that year was just great. You should read about it. You can do a show about it, about all of the innovations. For instance, in Harper's Ferry, I was in Harper's Ferry 2 days ago. The John Brown Fort in Harper's Ferry was deconstructed brick by brick and taken to Chicago for the exhibition in 1893. You had Edison and Edison and Tesla vying over whether AC power or DC power was going to rule the world. All of that's happening around the Chicago exhibition of 1893. But that leads up to 1895, and that's the first documented landing.
So 1894. We don't care about 1894. That was
it's sort of a throwaway year. Right. I don't remember what happened in 1994, but 1894, that was people who were tired from.
That was the year my
and they were getting ready for 1895. I think that's obvious what was happening.
That was the year of my 727th marriage. So, by the way, do you know what Antarctica means?
No, tell me.
It actually means without bears.
Without bears.
Like literally, it means without bears. That's.
Does that mean that the Arctic means with bears?
Land without bears. Arctic actually means bears. Yeah. So yeah.
Okay. Well, see, that's my legal education deduction going there. But that 1895, you had the first documented landing, but you also had, and this is where it really kicks into your show, sort of the first governmental thing happens regarding Antarctica. It's the 6th International Geographical Congress passes the Antarctica Resolution. And the Antarctica Resolution says that the exploration of Antarctica is a great geographical feat, and it needs to happen by the end of the decade. So that's really that gets the ball rolling. That's why in that last end of the 1800s, there are so many people trying to figure out what's going on with Antarctica. So, it's an exciting time.
So who was parties to that? The United States, Napoleon, the Ottomans, Ataturk the Great. I mean,
that'd be an interesting tea party.
The Kaiser.
I don't know actually who. I'm assuming, and I'm going to have to confess, I don't want to get this wrong, but I'm not afraid of going out on a limb here that the 6th Geographical Conference was probably like the preceding 5, and it was probably a lot of old white men sitting around a table. I'm just assuming that I don't know. Could be wrong. This could have been a diverse cast of characters, but I doubt it.
Right, and they probably represented Russia and the United States, Great Britain.
Yeah. You would have had the UK. You would have had the UK, Russia, and U.S. Maybe somebody from South America's, and because we'll get into that when we talk about the Antarctica Treaty. But all of that period of really exciting discovery leads you up to the first decade of the 1900s. That's when Ernest Shackleton makes his first voyage down there. I always love that it was the voyage of the Nimrod. I think that's interesting. It's unfortunate.
Nimrod gets a bad name.
Well, I know, but the name it gets is it sort of is what it is, misperception or not. And so I doubt Ernest Shackleton wants to be known with the voyage of the Nimrod before he catches the Endurance in ice and has the ordeal. But that's the first vehicle where they both landed. That was the first time you had motorized vehicles on Antarctica. They made it to 88 degrees and 23 minutes south. So that was the furthest south anybody had ever gotten. 1911, people get to the South Pole twice. It's twice in 33 days, I believe. 2 expeditions that reached the South Pole twice in 33 days. But to skip forward and to get into sort of modern history.
But can we just put a pin in that for a second? Because I want to make sure I'm right about something. So this is 88 degrees and 23 minutes south. I am assuming that in the southern hemisphere and the northern hemisphere, that the most you can go is 90 degrees for 180 degrees on one half of the okay. So that's pretty far. So each degree after that is how many miles roughly? I guess it's a line of what would that be, longitude? So
I don't. Well, you got me there. We're gonna have to let the guys in the editing booth figure that one out. But 88 degrees is in 23 minutes is south, because I think the minutes, I think they're 60 minutes. I'm not sure. Somebody will know that I'm wrong.
It would make sense, but I don't know the answer to that. And it's fine that you don't, because that's not what I asked you to look into. But that you were so specific, I thought maybe. But anyway, that's pretty darn close to 90 degrees, which is, in essence, 0. And I guess that would be the magnetic South Pole at that point, or at least what.
And you remember that the poles, the way they are, is they're a little bit off from where you expect them. They can switch around, but you have that.
They move
going on. But that period, I mean, after 1911, then you have sort of the world sort of in an interesting flux. Then you have World War I come up.
Yeah.
You have the decimation of the world economy and the rebuilding of the world economy. But then you get close to, you have that interesting period. I mean, you had a colonial period before, but right before World War II, you have everybody seems to have colonies wherever they can have colonies around the world. I mean, a lot of that, well, that's another episode. But you had an increased number of expeditions to Antarctica during this period leading up to World War II. Just sort of a belief from all different sides that people needed to get to Antarctica and that they needed to claim territory and that they needed to figure out what was there. And I'm assuming that in that time it was to see what was there, that what might be able to benefit them. Because so in 1944,
oil, gold, coal, iron, the
copper. You have 1944. You have the first permanent stations in Antarctica. Port Lockroy, that's on Winky Island. Hope Bay, that's on the peninsula. When I went to Antarctica, I went on the peninsula. The peninsula is what curves up towards the Drake Passage towards Argentina, and so that's the part of Antarctica that most people, people who travel to Antarctica, they usually travel to the peninsula because it's just a big deal to travel anywhere else in the peninsula.
A couple things. Is that named after Sir Francis Drake?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And can you confirm or deny that when you were there, you looked exactly like Han Solo at the beginning of Empire Strikes Back?
I don't think I look like that. I think Han Solo is probably better looking. So they had that.
Well, I'm going to go 1890s on you and go balderdash.
But they had but what's great about Sir Francis Drake, the Drake Passage, some of the roughest water in the world. It can also occasionally be deathly still, and people who traveled the Drake a lot, especially people who are making trips to Antarctica, tourist trips to Antarctica, they'll call it the Drake Lake. Mm. But most times this is a place with pretty big waves. When I went on, that's when everybody was was sort of confining themselves to their rooms with ear patches and wrist and anything that they had to try to fend off nausea.
What is the Cape at the bottom of it? Is that the Cape of Good Hope?
Is the Cape? I always get the Cape of Good Hope and Cape Horn confused.
But I think that is the Cape of Good Hope because the waters are so rough and people had to hope to get through when they were, because that was the passage that you take from Europe to get to Africa and Asia. Yeah. And I think literally it was because you had to have good hope to get through.
No, that's actually, but during that, I think that, I bet you're right. If we had a map pulled up, I'm sure we would see it. But yeah, that's Sir Francis Drake. All of the people that we've heard about in history have made that passage at some point. But between 44 and 57, you have a lot of exploration. You have there are 7 nations prior to 1957 or right after 1957 that have claimed territory in Antarctica. Australia, Norway, Argentina, Chile, France, the French Republic, UK, and New Zealand had all claimed territory because in 1957 something big happened that would affect Antarctica to this day, and that was the declaration of the International Geophysical Year. And why that is important is because the International Geophysical Year is what then would trigger 2 years later the Antarctic Treaty. That was the start, and people taking a real look, saying we need to come up with some sort of agreement that's going to govern this. We can't just have every nation coming down. I think the 7 nations that already had staked a claim to territory, they didn't want other countries coming and staking a claim to territory in Antarctica anymore.
What were those 7 countries?
Australia, Norway, Argentina, Chile, France, UK, and New Zealand, and then there's it's 620,000 square miles east of the Ross Ice Shelf is an unclaimed area of Antarctica that's called Marie Byrd Land. Mm-hmm. Marie Byrd Land. So that's the only area of Antarctica that's unclaimed. That one sort of interesting piece of trivia is that happened between 1957 and 1959. Unlike the Forget Me year of 1894, 1958, Sir Edmund Hillary got into the game, and he went to the South Pole.
Oh, okay.
Let's say, I think it was 1953 that he climbed Everest. Yep. About 1953. So 1958, he gets into the game, goes to the South Pole. Then in 1983, fast forward, this is sort of something you probably don't want to know about. 1953, there's this guy, I think his name was Mike Dunn. He was a promoter. He had the idea that we need to get the world's greatest explorers and drop them off at the North Pole. So Edmund Hillary and Neil Armstrong got on a tiny little plane and got dropped off at the North Pole. And so that makes Edmund Hillary the only person that's ever been to the South Pole, been to the North Pole, and climbed Mount Everest. That's pretty big.
That is a great piece of trivia. And by the way, I was wrong. It's Cape Horn. So
is Cape Horn? Okay.
My little exposition on that's probably the Cape of Good Hope for that reason. As much sense as it made, I'm wrong. That Cape of Good Hope is under Cape Town, Africa. So
okay. Well, I told you, I always get them wrong. I know that one's in Africa and one's in South America, but I get them backwards.
Yeah, no. We're not afraid to get things wrong. We have little computers we're going to. Before we move on, Norway. Norway's a little out of its territory, and probably from today's standards, its size as a world power, to be going all the way up from Norway, which literally means the North Way, down to. So I guess they're seafaring, but what's their claim to Antarctica based on? I mean, I guess they just one of their ships got there, and that may be it.
And I can't remember this history. I've heard it. I can't remember the history too well, so anybody listening will have to take a look, trust the Google machine. I think Norway was connected to the Queen Maud Island, or Queen Maud Land. I think Queen Maud was Queen of Norway, I believe. They dedicated this huge stake of land, claimed a lot of territory. The United States jumped in and they disputed the claim. This would have been World War II, because I know that Germany disputed the claim as well, and Germany made flights over Antarctica, and they dropped off, I don't know whether they're coins or metal markers, I think like 26,000 with swastikas emblazoned on them to claim their territory, but they never made any official claim of territory in Antarctica. They were just ticked off at Norway for overreaching. But all this it's pretty unsettled time for the world. So maybe the Norwegians thought that they would just sort of sneak one in there when everybody was focused on other matters. I'm not sure, but I don't know. And however many of these 26,000 metal swastika Nazi plates are down there covering Antarctica, I'm not sure about that either.
Well, this is one of the things that maybe we'll talk about on the Nazis and the Occult show, which is coming in October with a 3-person panel, and at least 2 of them are experts. So anyway, so all right.
Well, they had all of this. I mean, it's too much talking, but that leads us up to what you really wanted to talk about, and that's 1959. People come up with the idea for the Antarctic Treaty. It's ratified in 1961. There are 12 member nations: Argentina, Australia, Belgium. They always out-hit their weight class. Chile, the French Republic, Japan, New Zealand, Norway, South Africa, the USSR. This is when the Soviet Union is in existence, the United Kingdom, and the United States. So 12 member nations. The treaty, one of the easiest treaties that you're ever going to see to understand, because it's really simple. The treaty sets out that Antarctica is going to be dedicated to exclusively peaceful purposes. The treaty really has 3 provisions. First is exclusively peaceful purposes, prohibition on military bases, maneuvers, or tests. That's important as we're looking, as you're thinking about the time period that we're in, 59, 61. Any military tests nobody wants to have happening down there. There's no ban on military personnel for scientific research, but military personnel for military purposes are strictly out. The second prong of the treaty is dedicating Antarctica to scientific research. A big component of that is sort of I guess, outside of the League of Nations. After the League of Nations, this might be the first sort of attempt at collective internationalism, but there's supposed to be the free exchange of data between countries that are doing research in Antarctica. And so if you think of the countries involved, you have France, the U.S., Japan, USSR. You have all of these countries are supposedly going to be exchanging their scientific data freely. The third part, and this is going to be a key part that's important legally, it's probably why the Antarctic Treaty was able to exist in the first place. The third part is the concept of territorial sovereignty. Basically what this says in the Antarctic Treaty is if you sign on to this treaty, you don't have to give up what you've already claimed. So those 7 nations that have already claimed territory in Antarctica, they didn't have to give up those claims because of the treaty. But what the treaty says is we're going to dedicate it in peaceful purposes, science, territorial sovereignty. You countries that are here, you don't have to give up your claims. But while this treaty is in effect, there's not going to be any new expansion, new declarations, or stakes of claim to territory until we're done with the treaty. And then they reiterated no nuclear tests. So once again, their focus is I think somebody can correct me. I'm just guessing that a big focus was the U.S. and USSR wanting to make sure that there were no nuclear tests anywhere, and this is sort of one of the ways they did it. The Antarctic Treaty covers land south of 60 degrees.
Well, I imagine that Japan wasn't too thrilled about more tests going on either, although I think in the 50s, Japan was still sort of a quasi-protectorate of the U.S.
Well, and I just, this is off subject, but have you listened to the Bomber Mafia, Malcolm Gladwell's book? That's really interesting because I forget what the guy's name is, the bomber, but they spent some time talking about, and I think I listened to an episode where Dan Carlin, Hardcore History,
Sure.
his podcast, where he interviewed Malcolm Gladwell, and they were talking about the firebombing of Japan and
I
the
heard that,
destruction
sure.
of Japan, and that really today when we're talking about the atomic weapons that were used, we tend to think of them in terms of nuclear weapons that we have today, and we really don't see. It seems to us that use of atomic weapons in Japan was so far and beyond what was happening in Japan and destruction to that time. But really, when you look at the numbers, the firebombing had been so destructive of Japanese cities that really they were almost equivalent types of military tactics. It was really fascinating stuff I didn't know.
Yeah, he did I heard that series Firestorm on these. If anyone who doesn't know Dan Carlin, he typically does multi-part podcasts. They come out several months apart typically, and they're often, each individual show might be 3 to 5 hours. So but they're well worth it, well researched, and yes, and
makes the Garden of Doom look like it's a coffee break that in the time. And if anybody's going to listen, check out Hardcore History. Try to find the episode that he did on the start of the First World War.
Yes.
His coverage of the assassination of the Archduke is just it's fascinating. I think it's a good story. But that 60-degree circle, getting back to Antarctica.
Well, I'm sort of a big fan of the Wrath of the Khans series as well. But actually, I do want to put a pin in. So I'm glad we had a little digression, because the language of this treaty is so similar in spirit and actual wording to the treaty on outer space. Now, there's a little bit more about resources of space, and I don't know if that's because countries have regrets about what they did in Antarctica, or because in space they don't think there's going to be 2 miles or 200 miles of ice to have to go through before you get to land. And so even though space is really, really hard to get to, not that Antarctica isn't, that it seems like it's more likely to get resources and habitable communities or colonies or modules, whatever, there. And we've talked about all this on prior episodes. But for those of you who this is your first indoctrination into garden views, or haven't listened to the shows that deal with space, you should listen to those as well, because if you're interested in that, you'll be interested, and you'll see why I picked Antarctica. I mean, it's probably self-evident at this point, but it is like space. It's something which they're trying to do some sort of international agreements. They're trying to live up to them and keep it so that it's not for military uses. There's a little bit more with the resources, but there's a debate that Professor Koplow from Georgetown brought up that what's military? Anything that's opposite of military means peaceful, and then there's always like, no, the military, they mean aggressive. So you can use the military for peaceful resupplying, scientific research purposes, I guess basic security. And that's what's happening in Antarctica. And for you cynics out there, you can probably say, well, you can every embassy has a CIA liaison officer. I'm not saying there are in Antarctica, but you can see what the extrapolation here is. So that's my own little commentary, only partly editorial, and then we'll get back to exactly where you left off.
Well, I think I guess that reminds me that there are couple of other things of the treaty that sort of factor in, will become more important just because of the way they relate. Like I said, it covers land south of 60 degrees. You have the Arctic Circle, you have the Antarctic Circle, you cross the 60-degree line. I thought it was a little bit over 60 degrees. You're officially in Antarctica. So if you take a boat to Antarctica, there will be a lot of people who are trying to get their seventh continent out of the way. They really start cheering when they cross that line. I thought that was akin to counting a state where you'd just done a layover in an airport. But we'd say the other thing the treaty does,
supersizing that though,
it permits inspections. So it says that for the 12 member nations, and now we have, since the Antarctic Treaty, spoiler alert, we have 40 nations that are part of, and yes, China is a part too. That's sometimes the first question people have when they're thinking about countries that are sort of at odds. But the treaty said that each of these member nations is going to be able to designate inspectors, and with notice, they can go anywhere. They can go anywhere on Antarctica. They're expected to be allowed to inspect anything. Expected to inspect. It's a weird turn of phrase there, but they're expected to be able to inspect anything wherever they go, anybody else's bases. For disputes that arise under the treaty, first, the treaty simply says that people are supposed to try to resolve them. Try to resolve them amicably. It's sort of like a try to figure it out, exclamation mark. But if you can't, you can't figure it out.
We see that in contracts all the time, that the parties are supposed to negotiate in good faith before.
But then the kicker comes in and says that if you can't, then you can refer the matter to the International Court of Justice. So that links the Antarctic Treaty to other global judicial bodies.
And that Court of Justice is where? Is it in The Hague, like all the other international courts?
I think that's Hague, like the International Criminal Court.
Well, that's Belgium again, right? That's why that's
Belgium's really, they've done a lot for the world as far as beer goes, and I think that while they've had other people soused on their beer, that they've been going around, and I've often said that that the Swedes, I think it's isn't IKEA Swedish?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, so IKEA, it's hard to believe that the Swedes haven't done better on the world stage. If they can fit a kitchen cabinets into a 2-inch tall cardboard box, that it's really surprising that the Swedes haven't made more of a mark on the world. I shouldn't say that. I'm sure we have lots of Swedes listening who you have a proud country.
Listen, they gave us Varangians. They gave us Beowulf.
They give us ABBA.
I think they're from Oslo. I think that's Norway.
You think that? Well, that's Norway, Queen Maud land. Norway probably claimed their territory in Antarctica because they wanted to send ABBA there.
The real Waterloo. No, so but yeah, Belgium. Yeah, so okay, they said, hey, put the Hague here, no problem, but we want in. So sounds good, and they have good chocolate. But I've been told that the chocolate actually comes from Switzerland. I don't know what's true.
Well, they have after 61. There's not too much to talk about. There's you have some related agreements about Antarctica that come around. 1972, you have the CCAS, I think it's the Convention for the Conservation of Antarctic Seals. That comes into play. It's ratified, I think, 1978. 1980, you have people to propose the CCAMLR, the Convention on the Conservation of Antarctica and Antarctic Marine Living Resources, and that kicks in 1982 when it's ratified. Those are two independent agreements, but those two independent agreements are important because signatories agreed to the territorial provisions of the Antarctic Treaty in those two side agreements. So you have a lot more countries participating in the CCA or the CCA-MLR and signing on. But in signing on to those two agreements about seals and marine resources, they're signing on to the territorial provisions in the Antarctic Treaty, saying that we understand that nobody's going to be able to claim extra territory here. The third related agreement's 1991. It's not an independent agreement. It's part of the Antarctic Treaty, or stems from it, but that's the Protocol on Environmental Protection for the Antarctic Treaty. Fun fact for anybody that takes krill oil as a supplement, that's the main purpose of the CCA-MLR, that it's protecting marine resources, but it's mainly protecting krill, finfish, and marine resources. An important thing about that agreement, and that might be one that has a bearing on agreements in space in the future, is that agreement, the Marine Resources Agreement, is the first agreement that took an ecosystem focus of Antarctica. So it meant that, like, while we're protecting krill or we're protecting finfish, what we're going to do is we're going to have scientists who are able to say that fishing of krill, fishing of finfish, that it's affecting the overall Antarctic ecosystem. and so we're able to put limits on fishing because of that. So that was a new approach in law, the ecosystem approach, that let somebody say, hey, we're going to limit this fishing not just because of the effect on the fish themselves, but on the effect on the whole ecosystem.
Right, and you could extrapolate that if you want to entire environments, because fish is just another type of resource at the end of it. So I have a couple of things here. I don't know if you know the answers, but we'll probably discuss them. Firstly, I'm not sure if it's codified in any of the laws, but my understanding in Antarctica, either it's custom or it is in the treaties, where if somebody needs help, that you are, whatever nation they're from, if you're close, you're required to give help, borrowing from the law of the sea. That, obviously, if you don't do it, you're a rogue, you're a pirate, whatever. But like the law of the sea, if there's bodies in the water, doesn't matter if they were your enemies before, you're supposed to try to assist them.
Yeah, the interplay of these agreements is really, really interesting, because before, when you have this CCA-MLR, the ecosystem approach to the marine resources, at that same time, and this sort of plays into what you're thinking about space law too, or what you've been talking about, is people start saying we need to consider some sort of instrument like this for mineral resources on Antarctica. That's 1981. 1982, you have the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, that minerals on the seabed beyond national jurisdiction are a common heritage for everybody. So the Law of the Sea sets that out. People point to it and they say minerals in Antarctica should be the same thing as the way you've described these minerals beyond national jurisdiction in the Law of the Sea. And so that leads to this 1991 environmental protocol, which we're familiar with the Madrid Protocol as it relates to trademarks in the legal world. This is also the Madrid Protocol, but it's 1991. It's a different protocol. Madrid must have a thing for the formation of protocols.
They've got Belgium, Flemish envy.
Yeah. Probably Spanish feel they must have gotten permission from Belgium to have another protocol conference.
That's right.
Spain, but they have the biggest part of that Madrid Protocol, and I'll say the environmental protocol, which lasts through 2048. Remember, this is also, we're talking about the 2048. It's about the same time people are starting to think about the 50th anniversary of the treaty and starting to wonder whether it has legs and needs to be changed, but it goes through 2048. There's a ban on mining on Antarctica. So through 2048, there's a total ban on mining unless it's a scientific mining operation. There's never really been mining on Antarctica outside of exploration, and that's because of what you've said. It's commercially unfeasible to do. There's limited quantities. There are metals, coal, oil, but the ice, read Endurance, and you'll see that Antarctica is not, even with global warming, it's not the most hospitable place in the world. It's actually getting worse with global warming, that there's rain now in places where we don't think there's ever been rain. But it really right now is I agree with you that as far as mining rare metals in space, that seems right now, given the activity of SpaceX, that seems more realistic than people really making mining on Antarctica feasible to do from an economic perspective.
Okay, so a few questions. One, I don't know if you know the answer to it, but countries have a 200-mile exclusive economic zone for the sea, from their borders, and then there's we talked about this on episode, but it gets complex when countries are within 200 miles of each other, but it manages to get worked out. Is there also this 200-mile sort of exclusive or exclusion zone around Antarctica, or no?
I don't know the answer to that question, frankly, and I feel like I should. I know that there's some degree of protection because you have Antarctica. As you think about the big ice mass that's the center of Antarctica, but then you have it's surrounded by islands upon islands upon islands, and they're all a part of Antarctica. And so by the time you factor the islands, factor the peninsula, and you move out a little bit further than that, you're covering a pretty huge area. But I don't know what the actual if Antarctica, especially given the fact that it has different countries staking claims to it. I don't remember anything in the treaty that talks about a certain exclusive zone around it. That might be in the, if that's anywhere, I'd probably need to take a second look at that Marine Living Resources agreement back in '82. Okay.
What about the territories which are claimed? So McMurdo Station, I mean, I presume that almost all of the stations, or most of them, are near the coast so they can get resupplied. I mean, I'm sure there's inbound stations. If that's U.S. sovereign territory, does it end at the water's edge, except for getting there or getting out, what we call ingress and egress? Or is there a 200-mile zone, for the United States, extending from McMurdo and whatever the Russian base is, extending from there, New Zealand, same kind of thing? Or no, it's just all international.
I don't believe there's the same sort of concept of territoriality that there exists in the rest of the world, given the treaty's provisions about, while you still technically have this area that you've claimed, you don't have, you can't do. It's like having property that somebody has an easement on, that you technically own it, but you can't do whatever you want with it. Because when we talk about those 70 permanent bases down there now, and a lot have closed. If you go to Wikipedia and you look at the list of permanent Antarctic research stations, treaty provides that if you put a permanent station up, that if you decide to close it, you're supposed to take everything off of Antarctica that you put there. That doesn't really happen. It's not feasible to happen. It's not as bad as Sir Edmund's Mount Everest with oxygen bottles, but it is a thing where you have dilapidated structures. When I went there, and the island that we went swimming on, it was an old British sealing station, and so it's dilapidated buildings, old boats, but nobody had been there in some time. But what I was going to say about that is that you have these 70 permanent stations from 29 countries. If you only have 7 nations that have territorial stakes to Antarctica, that means you have 22 more countries with permanent bases in Antarctica than you do countries who have claimed exclusive territory. So while somebody might make a claim of exclusive territory, really that only makes a difference after the treaty expires and people go back to staking or claiming their own little piece of the pie.
Are you aware of any cases where there's been hostilities between a country? So whenever I don't want to call a country out, I just use Jeffzikistan. So let's just say Jeffzikistan has one of those 70 bases. But Jeffzikistan the U.S. does not like Jeffzikistan, and one of my 70 bases is really close to U.S. territory. But the U.S. says, no, Jeffzikistan, you cannot land at our port. You've got to go 700 miles the other way, and talk to Argentina or Russia or whoever you like. I mean, do hostilities end because it's such a barren, remote part that you even let Jeffzikistan, the pariah state, in through U.S. customs or whatever to resupply their base, or do whatever they need to, or did they divert them? And after that very long question, the answer may well be got no idea.
Well, I think Pakistan has a permanent station in Antarctica, I think.
It's the name is Jeffzikistan and Pakistan. It's just a coincidence.
Jeffzikistan. I'm not saying Pakistan's like this bad actor country, but there are lots of people with bases in Antarctica. I don't know of any hostilities or even problems that have come up between researchers like that. I know that issues seem to get a little bit more complex when you're talking about tour operators taking groups to Antarctica. Some of the work where you have some of the piracy involving fish,
Right.
your krill pirates. When I was on a boat in Antarctica, we would see boats that were illegally fishing for krill. I don't know of anything else. I'm sort of envisioning, I don't know if you watch For All Mankind, the Apple TV show.
Nope.
That reimagines the moon landing. Won't give away any spoilers of how they reimagine Apollo and how history would have changed if Apollo had gone differently. But there's a situation in For All Mankind where both the Russians and the United States have research bases that they put on the moon on edges of a crater where they're doing some mining activities. And in that show, there is a little bit of espionage between the two. There's questioning of motives. The one thing that I think is different about Antarctica than the fictional show of For All Mankind is that you had the treaty that sets out absolute rights of inspection as long as you get it okayed. So I'm not even sure. I would like to Google and see whether there's ever been a request for inspection made that's been denied. Because at this same time, you have after the treaty happens, you have consultative meetings every so often about Antarctica. That I don't know how many years were between these meetings that they would have. The meetings were always of the Antarctic stakeholders that were the countries. People in the 70s started saying we need to open these meetings up to NGOs and not just your NGOs, your IGOs, your intergovernmental operators. So that begins happening. Meetings are starting to get opened up. Other organizations, NGO organizations, are starting that have their basis in Antarctica. Like 1991, I talked about tour operators, but that's a big deal in Antarctica. The International Association of Antarctic Tour Operators starts up. So it's this international group. And when I went on my trip to Antarctica, I was with a group called One Oceans Expeditions. Actually, one of the interesting facts is that the boat that I was on was a Russian research vessel, and it was the sister ship to the Russian vessel that's at the start of the movie Titanic. The lady climbs up on the rail and throws her necklace off. But I was on the sister ship of that boat. I believe that boat was the Vavilov. But the ship I went on, the captain was from Australia, and he would always talk about how there had to be this tight working relationship between all of the tour operators, because you have National Geographic, you have One Ocean, you have lots of different groups that are sending ships to Antarctica with groups of people, and that can be all of the scientific work and exploration of Antarctica is supposed to happen in such a way that it doesn't put a burden on the continent. And so they really have to time when people go. There's provisions for how long they can spend on the mainland. You really are lots of penguins down there, and you don't want harm to come to them because of too many people with selfie sticks.
Can I ask you two questions that are, one's directly related to that, and the other one I think is related to the first question. And that is, if you want to open up one of these tour groups to go down there, do you have to go through this treaty organization, the group of 12, the group of 40? Do you have to go to the UN? How do you get a license to be a tour group running tours to Antarctica?
Well, that's a good question. I should have asked somebody, but I believe everybody who goes to Antarctica, I believe every tour operator that goes down there has to be a member of this international group. They have to have part of that is checking certain boxes on how you're running tours to Antarctica, and then you have to figure out where they all leave from the sort of similar places in the world.
Sure.
That a lot of trips that I was on, a lot of trips to the peninsula leave from Ushuaia at the bottom tip, southernmost town in the world. It's a little tip in the bottom of Argentina. King crab is their steak. For Buenos Aires is beef. Ushuaia, Argentina's king crab. But
Of course, who doesn't know that?
Yeah, a lot of these groups are leaving from there, but I'm not sure exactly how the tour operators themselves get permission to run the tours, because I'm not sure who approves of their operations, like who does IAATO answer to, and that's what you've invited me on your podcast to answer, but I don't have any idea.
Well, we thought more about space, but so that's okay. So similar to that, let's go back to Jeff Zikistan, our friend Jeff Zikistan. So Jeff Zikistan wants to open up a base. Forget that we had a base; it closed. We have to open up a new one. We actually took all of our stuff, and we can't find it anymore. We want to open a base. I presume on unclaimed land there. If Jeff Zikistan wants to open a scientific research base on Antarctica, do we have to go through that international group, that Treaty of 40, or some group through the UN, or do we just show up one day, we put up a scientific base, go, hey guys, Jeff Zikistan is now country 71?
Well, you would need to be a signatory. So you have the 40 countries who have become signatories to the treaty. So that means that there's lots of other countries out there who have not become signatories of the country yet. So if Jeff Zikistan wasn't a signatory to the treaty, the first thing that you need to do is you need to assemble all of your voters in your podcast studio. You need to ratify the treaty and become a signatory to it, agree to the overarching provisions of it about scientific purposes, peaceful purposes, and territoriality. Then I think you're good to go. Okay. I don't think there's a board of zoning.
All right, so I did the math on this one. So we've got 70 countries. Oh, there's 70 bases. So they're not from 70. There's 70 bases from 29 countries, right?
Yeah.
So actually, there's less countries that have bases than the 40 nations that are there.
Yeah.
Would it be possible for Jeff Zikistan? Let's just say Jeff Zikistan and the U.S. gets along just great. Jeff Zikistan wants to put a base on Antarctica, and they negotiate with the United States to put it on, right next to McMurdo. We go, and the U.S. says, that's great. Does Jeff Zikistan have to check with anyone else, or is it because that is the U.S.'s claim, the U.S. can lease it to Jeff Zikistan or Starbucks or whomever they want, or no?
Remember, the key thing to remember is that the U.S. has a base, but the U.S. isn't one of the countries that has made a territorial claim to Antarctica. So the U.S. has a base, but they don't have any. First, they don't have any territorial claim to Antarctica, and even if they had a territorial claim, if the United States was included in that list of the 7 original countries that had staked a claim, that the territoriality really doesn't mean anything in Antarctica anymore. It might mean something when the treaty ends.
Expires.
Then people might claim sovereignty for their portion. But right now, all you have is the ability to say that we staked claim to Antarctica in the past, but you don't have any. Your claim of territoriality doesn't really have any substance after you had the treaty, because the treaty says that while you don't have to give this up, that you can't expand it, you really can't establish anything, because if you established any boundaries, if you established any restrictions on who could cross your land, all of a sudden then you're running afoul of the treaty's main purpose, which is the free, open exchange of ideas and the ability of anyone to go anywhere.
So even if it's Norway that does have a territorial claim, they couldn't do it any more than the United States could to let Jeff Zikistan on.
What's Norway going to do? What's Norway really going to do?
No, but if Norway said, Jeff Zikistan, come on, you can come on Queen Maud Island and open your base, but Jeff Zikistan's not part of the treaty, it wouldn't be Norway that would do anything about it, it would be everybody else. But would Norway technically be violative of the treaty? And Jeff Zikistan would just be, sort of an accomplice, but they're not part of the treaty, so they're not bound by it. They might just be a pariah.
Yeah, and they would have to, and you would have to figure out. I'm not actually sure how that dispute would end up getting resolved. It would be, I saw that, 2 nations this week resolved that issue of the little island. Um, I won't remember, but I read an article yesterday that two nations had finally, they said it was the most peaceful war ever, that they had resolved ownership of a tiny island somewhere in the world. One nation took 60% of it, the other took 40%, and called it a day. I'm not sure how claims like that, or claims that people have done something wrong under the treaty, would be resolved if all of a sudden, I mean, we have the provisions of the treaty. It says International Court of Justice if you don't just resolve things between yourselves. But if something actually went wrong, say tomorrow, part of the Ross ice shelf collapsed, and instead of seeing open water, you saw gold deposits, that might change the tenor of,
yes.
of the Antarctic Treaty. Because right now, people think, hey, we know that there's something there, but there's not much of it, and it's too hard to get. But if all of a sudden they saw tomorrow, whoever had claimed the Ross Ice Shelf, and I believe that's claimed by, that might be Argentina. I don't remember, but whoever claimed it, that maybe it's Australia, I don't know, but whoever claimed it, they would probably start talking a little bit more about their sovereign claim to territory in Antarctica. I kind of have a jaundiced view of politics and world leaders like that. I think if we found out that there were rare minerals on Antarctica, all of a sudden they were be figuring out a way to get them.
Right, they were now easily accessible because the shelf came down and now you could get there. Yes, I agree with you 100%. And even if Argentina didn't have much to do about it, there'd be whatever the biggest mining companies in the world would be making sweetheart deals with Argentina and doing that. So we adhere to cynicism here in Garden Views because after all, we are a close cousin of Garden of Doom. Okay, couple of other questions. So you had mentioned that there was an agreement on the preservation or conservation of big fin fish. Does that apply to whales and orcas as well? Because they're not fish.
Well, I know that the CCAAMLR, I know it applies to krill, finfish, and marine resources. I know there is some. I think there's still some whaling activity. I mean, the Japanese are historic whaling people, and I know that they're still heavily involved in whaling. But I think whales are protected as marine resources under that. I'll have to get back to you. I'd like to.
There are some international
record.
Yes, of course. You can. Yes, absolutely. You can file a brief with us later, Counselor.
Yeah.
I know that there are some international whaling treaties. Period. Which I see no reason why they wouldn't cover Antarctica just the same. I assume that the nation of the orcas did not sign on to that sealing treaty, and they're going to eat as many seal as they want. Okay.
Exactly. And the big deal with krill, I didn't know this recently with krill, that I take a supplement of krill oil, but krill are one of the foods in that part of the world that turn the flesh of salmon pink. And so krill fishing is big not only for krill oil and supplement industry, but it's big also for the dyes that will turn the salmon flesh pink. Everybody wants to see bright pink salmon in the store,
sure.
And one of the worries are that people are going to fish the krill to extinction to make sure your salmon are pink.
Yeah, otherwise it just looks like it's just another whitefish. Okay, so I think the last question, and this definitely will have some extrapolation to space. So we understand that there are nations that are bound by this treaty. There are some enforcement mechanisms. Obviously, there's some rogue actors out there, but to our knowledge, there haven't been any rogue states. What about private business? So it's no longer Jeffzikistan, it's JeffX. And I have the resources equal to SpaceX, except it's JeffX, and I am evil. But I'm a private actor. And I'm like Blofeld or Spectre or Cobra Commander. I have unlimited resources. And I go to Antarctica to unclaimed territory, and then I claim it. It's international land. I'm not a signatory. I'm not even a state actor. Um, who who's responsible? Is it if Jeff X is incorporated in the United States, that the United States is responsible? Is no one responsible? If Jeff X does business in the United States but is flagged in I don't know, Switzerland, is Switzerland liable? Do the nation states all deploy their Arctic Marines to get rid of Jeff X? I mean, how does one stop a? Is there any mechanism to stop a private actor? And we have to pretend that the technology exists that a private actor could do an expedition like we saw in Kong versus Godzilla.
Yeah, I think well, it's not such an easy answer, but I believe there's a provision of the treaty that says that jurisdiction. I believe jurisdiction would be in any country where Jeff X is located. I believe that would be jurisdictionally, but jurisdiction really doesn't mean anything unless somebody can take action in that jurisdiction to stop you. The United Nations, they've gotten more involved in the last, I say the last few years, but I'm talking like somebody who still thinks it's the end of the 90s. Over the last two generations, the United Nations has gotten a little bit more involved in thinking about environmental protections for Antarctica, but the UN hasn't historically been very active. Antarctica, there's not much to get too active about. Right. I think that if we had the situation where a private non-governmental organization of business was active there, I think the United Nations would take action. I'm not exactly sure how that would be enforced to stop somebody from doing it. That's the question that sort of comes up. That the movie, what was the movie on the Leo DiCaprio movie, the comedy, Don't Look Up?
Don't Look Up.
That movie. Well, if you look at that and you strip away the dark humor, it's plainly about SpaceX or organizations like SpaceX, that it's a thinly veiled argument about companies. Maybe SpaceX, maybe Apple. The guy looked more like Tim Cook than Elon Musk.
Well, he needed the resources on the asteroid to make the phones, because it was all in Western China, and so that would have saved him trillions of dollars forever, and it was good, independent. So yeah, but
the question would be that, like, in that situation, if Elon wants to land a rocket on an asteroid and try to do mining operations, it's difficult to see if somebody doesn't stop him before. And like now, SpaceX, for instance, and I'll use Jeff X because of their whatever company. I don't want to besmirch anybody, but companies like that now have so many government contracts that are keeping them going, that there really is some reason why we would listen, and we're not going to go completely rogue in this situation. But say Jeff X wanted to launch rockets and land on the asteroids, and Jeff X had the resources to do that in a way that a small country doesn't have those resources. It's hard to see how anybody's going to be able to stop Jeff X from doing it. If it's here in Antarctica and Jeff X opens the operation, well, it becomes a lot more, might be an unpleasant situation, but it's easier to see how people end up stopping that activity. Because at the end of the day, Jeff X doesn't have a military. Countries that have signed on to the treaty do have militaries. But the question of how all of this translates to a similar question about space, well, I think it's a fascinating discussion, because we're at we've long since been at the stage where private actors, it's hard to see how you prevent private actors from doing anything that they want to do. That a cynic would say that our private companies, our commercial activities, are really our governing authorities now, and governments are sort of pretending, they deal with the stuff that corporations don't want to deal to. But when you have your multinational corporations that actually want to see something happen, a lot of people would say that it's difficult to imagine how that doesn't happen. Yeah. And with companies that not only want something to happen, but like JeffX, would have a demonstrated ability to make things happen, it's easy to see how. I watched Don't Look Up, and I wasn't thinking about any of that stuff as sort of a parody when we were talking about mining and a multinational corporation being that powerful, because if we're not there already, it seems like we're getting fairly close.
Right. No, I agree. But I don't want to bore the audience because I've had this same exact conversation with several guests already. But if this is your first trip into Garden Views, go listen to some of the past episodes on space, because I've had this discussion to various degrees of conclusion and with other guests, ranging from one professor who did not want to play this game at all with me, just was stuck on that, no, the technology isn't there, nobody would ever do such a thing, to others who did want to play the game with me, and some were saying, well, it's in everyone's business interest, and yes, they have enough ties to the government. But I think where you're going is when there's that $40 trillion asteroid or that $40 trillion resource that they can get, all of a sudden the rules go out the window, because the GDP of the Earth is $60 trillion. Right now, probably less. So once you find basically the entire GDP of the Earth out there, all of a sudden you're not so beholden to your earthbound contracts anymore, because you could start your own. Anyway, that I just said I didn't want to bore everyone with it, and I just did, but it was a shorter version. But
well, no, exactly. I think that's exactly the question, because they whatever happens on space, I think it's a little bit ludicrous to say that the technology's not there, because I'm not sure anybody knew that SpaceX's technology was here until there was a demonstrable show of it being here. That there's this, I think there's a lag between the way we understand technology and what technology might actually be here, because they, I think Antarctica, we use the example of the Ross ice shelf collapsing and there being gold below it. Some triggering event that causes everybody to rethink these things. Sometimes triggering events can make everything come together in a unified purpose. Sometimes triggering events can splinter everything. So if you found a part of Antarctica that had rare minerals, something really valuable on one nation's territorial claim, I think that would splinter efforts in Antarctica. I think all of a sudden you would have a different look, as opposed to triggering activities where we are both right outside of Baltimore right now, and like Liberty ships during the last century, when there was a need when the country was going to war, there was this collective effort, and it boggles the mind how many Liberty ships were built at Sparrows Point in Baltimore, and were coming out of there every day. I forget what the timetable was, but it was the people came together and did something phenomenal. I've been thinking, nobody wants to entertain this thought, but I'm waiting with bated breath about what the Webb Space Telescope is going to show us. And I thought that really, if we got the pictures back and it showed a barbecue somewhere out in the universe and people sitting looking up at the sky with coolers in their hands, I think that would be a unifying effort, except for maybe the people who would be a doomsday cult. But it would be a unifying effort that all of a sudden we would realize that our technical capabilities, that technology was able to be pushed a lot further than where we think technology is today.
Well, I'm not sure if you're right about there, but I'm sure about one thing, because if you had that telescope that saw the barbecue, there'd be somebody's deadbeat uncle there who brings nothing but eats plenty, bums cigarettes, and takes a lot of to-go stuff home. And it definitely takes a warm plate and plenty of stuff for the rest of the week. There's always that guy.
Exactly.
All right. Well, I think the good news, though, is that if there was JeffX, the bad actor, privately on Antarctica, you might have sort of like the Gulf War situation, the first one in like 1991, where there would be UN sanctions and one country would lead an effort be it the U.S. or another, and the other countries who could lend support. The UN passes, the Security Council passes the resolution, or the General Assembly does. I mean, they both have to. I'm just not sure in what order. It gets approved, and then whatever. Let's call Russia the good guys today. Russia leads that with and maybe Norway and your friend Sweden, who you've been
Belgium probably will be involved.
Belgium and Spain, and let's go with Uruguay too. They lead a coalition in there, and they take Jeff X out. But I think on Antarctica that is much more likely to happen than in space, because it's a lot harder to get to space and it takes a lot longer and stuff like that. But anyway, any other major points that I didn't ask you about or that you didn't get a chance to talk about?
No, I don't think so. I mean, one of the things you had brought up in advance was a question about piracy and rogue actors. I think that's your Jeff X situation. There is a lot of piracy, but there's also activity on the sort of the international front to curb piracy, but mainly because of it's not just we're not just dealing with the signatories to the Marine Life Treaty, and not just dealing with signatories to the Antarctic Treaty at that point, there's a violation of international law in a lot of cases that's going on, and so that is a question for the UN, or that's a question for people from countries where these actors are acting out of their ports.
Well, anyone can police international waters if they so choose. I mean, there was an effort with the Somalian pirates. But for the record, that's not Jeff X, that's Jeff Beard, the pirate, which is an entirely different thing. There is a commonality there, of course, but nobody can prove that. I thank you very much for volunteering to do this, taking time to do this. If you actually are so curious that you look into the other items where the questions weren't answered, we can talk again. And I think the cannabis thing is certainly greenlit. I don't know exactly for when, but it's greenlit. And is there anything you want to tell the folks about yourself to promote? I mean, I don't think you have a podcast. I don't think you write a book. A lot of my guests, they've got something to sell.
I don't really have anything to sell unless people have a legal dispute. If you go to dbllawyers.com and you check out our blog page, you'll occasionally see a couple of things that I've written, sometimes under duress, sometimes not. That I think I have one coming out soon. I don't know when it will be posted. There's one on there about debarment. The one coming out soon is I just wrote something about for people who were wondering whether they can secure intellectual property rights for their cannabis company, trademarks, copyrights, patent rights, to sort of talk about that in the lay of the legal land and debunk a few myths that are out there about that. But outside of that, I would encourage anybody who has the opportunity to actually go and see Antarctica before it melts and goes away. It's a amazing place to go to. One of those countries that stake territory, the Chileans, they have a base there with a post office and a lot of penguins. Really cool to see. You can go down there and see an albino penguin. Water's cold if you decide to go swimming, so bundle up. But outside of that, if I have a book or something in the future, I'll let you know about it. But
do the other penguins make fun of the penguin for being underdressed or for wearing white after Labor Day?
I would imagine. I think I have a picture of that somewhere. And they say albino, but it ends up being a gray penguin. It's just sort of gray, so it's like I don't know.
Penguins can be so cruel.
Exactly. So, when you go to a party and everybody's dressed one way and you're dressed the other, it can be a horrific experience.
Yeah, they look like, what are you doing? It's after 5. What are you, a farmer? So anyway, yeah. So yes, I thank you for all of that. Thank you for volunteering again. And folks, if you don't mind, give us 5 stars, write a review. Apple and Spotify both allows both of those things. I'm not sure about the other platforms. Tell your friends, tell your family, anyone who might be interested in these types of subjects. And if you have some type of litigation, certainly look at DBL and then look for Ben. We've talked about debunking, we've talked about debarment, we've talked about disbarment. And I think at this point we probably talked about demarcation lines at some point, but if not, it was inferred. So I think at this point we can depart. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Brandon. We will hear you next week.
Kids Learning Tube t-shirt or song today at kidslearningtubeshop.com. And don't forget to subscribe. Kids Learning Tube! On the southernmost continent, Antarctica is my name. I'm an ice-covered landmass, the geographic South Pole I do claim. My name is Antarctica, the southern ocean surrounds me. I have emperor penguins and I'm uninhabited virtually. I am Antarctica, I'm classified as a desert because so little moisture falls from the sky, I assert. Typically I receive 2 inches of precipitation each year, primarily in the form of snow. Sahara Desert gets more than here. The Antarctic ice sheet covers more than 98% of me. Over 70% of Earth's fresh water is frozen in this ice sheet. Antarctica is the highest continent on our Earth. The average elevation is 8,200 feet for what it's worth. The lowest temperature on Earth was recorded on me, negative 128.6 Fahrenheit in 1983. The geographic South Pole is one of the 2 points where the Earth's axis of rotation intersects its surface. Around 30 countries maintain about 70 research stations. About 4,000 people live on me in population. On the southernmost continent, Antarctica is my name. I'm an ice-covered landmass, the geographic South Pole I do claim. My name is Antarctica, the southern ocean surrounds me. I have emperor penguins and I'm uninhabited virtually. There are certain animals that can survive my cold. They've adapted over time to exist on me, isn't that bold? There are 6 different species of penguins found on me. The emperors, Adelie, chinstrap, king gentoo, and macaroni. Only 6 of the 35 species of seals are found here. Ross, waddell, crab eater, leopard, fur, and southern elephant appear. I also have an abundance of whales that visit me. Here's a list of the names of whales that I most commonly see. There's the right whale, the blue whale, sei whale, and the humpback whale. The minke whale, the fin whale, the sperm whale, and killer whale do hail. I provide a lot of marine food to fill a whale's belly. Most whales visit to eat the krill that's in abundance around me. I'm the only continent in the entire world that isn't owned by any country officially. I'm a scientific preserve though. The world's largest recorded iceberg broke off my Ross Ice Shelf. The iceberg B-15 broke off in 2000, it wasn't stealth. On the southernmost continent, Antarctica is my name. I'm an ice-covered landmass, the geographic South Pole I do claim. My name is Antarctica, the southern